So I'd like to welcome everybody to the live broadcast of the Horsepower Rodeo podcast, where we talk about MotoGP, all things MotoGP. I'm doing it live here on TikTok, and this will be reposted on my channel at Horsepower Rodeo on YouTube. So if you're not here live, you can see it forever and always over on YouTube, because we're not going to ban that platform. So the headlines this week, we have a lot of wild cards going on. Yamaha has some new parts coming in, maybe an entirely new bike. The Aprillia is getting a 2024 version sent over to Trackhouse Racing's Raul Fernandez. And I also want to talk about Rolland Sands and his comments about why Americans won't watch MotoGP. So first of all, it's wild card weekend in MotoGP. They're back once again, and the person to really talk about is Dani Pedrosa. Yes, we can talk about Stephan Bradl at Honda and the stuff they'll be trying, and Lorenzo Salvadore at Aprillia and the stuff they'll be trying, but let's not kid ourselves. The person we want to talk about is Dani Pedrosa. Last time out, during a wild card round, I had said, listen, last time he had a seventh place, the time before that it was 10th. Let's all just kind of calm down on Dani. He's not God. And then he goes and he's fighting for a podium in both the sprint and the main race, finishes fourth in both. I think if he was a full-time rider, he would have shown some aggression and trying to get on the podium, but he wasn't trying to throw a monkey wrench into the world championship fight and cost Pecco Bagnaia some points. Can you imagine if a wild card rider wiped out the championship leader in the middle of the season? Crazy. You would see sanctions, you would see changes to the way they made wild card rules. There was no way he was going to do that. So he has a pretty successful weekend. Fourth place is crazy for a wild card rider. This guy still can race at his ripe old age. Was he 36 now, 37? That guy can still flat out ball. I'm so excited that he's back in Spain. His home race, he wants to be there. He wants to show that KTM has made some more steps, scared the shit out of Ducati maybe. That would be awfully nice. But what should we expect from the rest of these wildcard riders? What should we expect from Dani? And what are the manufacturers looking for? I think KTM is looking for that final step to finally close the gap to Ducati. They're going to be Ducati's number one contender all year, or at least that's what they've shown early in the season. And they want to make sure that they're making those last final adjustments to make this push into the summer break. They don't want to let it get to summer before they start trying a few more new things and really honing that bike to be a competitive bike every single track, every single week. They want to close the points down to the front so that the back half of the season, when it kind of gets wild, you have to remember the back half of the MotoGP season is all flyaway races. They're all races overseas. And so the tracks, the weather can be wild. The riders don't know the tracks as well. They're not as experienced there. The weekends, they can be back-to-back weekends with jet lag, and there's anything can happen in those last 8 rounds when we're talking about all over, from Australia to Malaysia to Thailand to Japan. It's a Wild West ride. So if you want to win a championship as KTM, you have to be close when we get to that part of the season. Last year, Brad Binder wasn't close enough when we got to be in that part of the season. So they have to dial everything in. Dani being there, we'll see what else they can bring to the track, what's been going on behind the scenes. Last time they bring out a brand new carbon fiber chassis that worked really well. And it'll really help them kind of figure out if they can make that push and rival Ducati. On the Aprilia side, I think they need to find out whether or not they have a good motorcycle or a motorcycle that's good for Maverick Vinales. Because in testing, that motorcycle was garbage. Both riders said winter testing was a complete waste of time. Awful, the worst they've ever had. Then they get to the season, and Aleix Espargaro says, hey, this is the most stable and planted a motorcycle that Aprilia has ever given me. He's really excited. Reinvigorated, he's feeling good. Maverick went off and lost 8-9 pounds. He's feeling in the best shape of his life. But the only one getting anything out of that Aprilia right now is Maverick. Everyone else is kind of down at the end. So here comes Lorenzo Salvadore with a new lab bike, testing a bunch of new things, trying to overcome some of these obstacles that Aprilia have. On the same weekend, they're handing Trackhouse Racing's Raul Fernandez a 2024 bike. He's been riding the 2023 bike most of this season. So now you have all 4 riders on the exact same bike, and we've got a test rider testing new things. So Aprilia is there to figure out whether or not this is a bike that can be made for anyone to ride, or is this a bike that only Maverick can ride? Because if you look at it, the reason Ducati is considered the dominant motorcycle isn't because they won championships. Lots of riders have won championships on not the best motorcycle on the grid, and not the most unanimously sought after motorcycle on the grid. Take Marc Marquez in 2019. There was Marc on a Honda, there was everyone else on the Honda. Fabio Quartararo, 2021. 2022, everyone else on a Yamaha. But Ducati, seems like everyone can ride that bike. No matter what your riding style is, you have to do some adjusting, you have to figure it out for yourself, but that bike is just universally rideable. So what does Aprilia have? Which one do they have? Do they have a Honda Yamaha, or do they have a Ducati? And you can start putting KTM in that same kind of questionable ecosystem, because Brad Binder's kind of been the one guy that could show pace on the KTM. Jack Miller's had a good start to last year and then kind of fell off. Augusto Fernandez, always, back mid-pack. Now Pedro Acosta feels like he's the only one that can get anything out of that KTM. So they have to figure that out as well. Over at Yamaha, Fabio Quartararo says, I don't want a quantity of new parts to try. I want quality. And I think this goes a lot deeper than just that comment, because the media, and especially those in the media center on a MotoGP weekend, are so obsessed with new parts. They're so obsessed with what the teams are bringing this weekend. What is the factory bringing this weekend? Does Pedro have the latest factory stuff? Does Brad have the latest factory stuff? What are the new shiny toys on the motorcycle? They're so obsessed with it, it drives me nuts, because it is such a small part. Do we all understand that in MotoGP, the difference between winning a race and being 20th is sometimes less than a second per lap? The difference between being first and being fourth, being on the top step of the podium to being off the podium completely, is sometimes only 3 or 4 seconds for the whole race. So when we're talking about development, we're dealing in such small terms, such small differences. Every little millimeter of torque, power, grip, control, geometry, everything just matters so much, because every difference is so minuscule. And a lot of times they can't even feel the difference from one thing to another. That's why just bringing new parts, slapping them on, seeing if they work and pulling them off and slapping new shit on, that's not how development works. It's not called try new shit. It's called development. So if you put something on the bike and it makes the bike drastically worse, I get it. They pull that off. They take it back to the drawing board. They take it back to the laboratory. But when you bring something in and maybe it doesn't show any drastic difference, like you put on a new exhaust and didn't show any drastic difference, but you didn't get anything worse out of it, you leave it on the bike to see if it allows you to do other things with the bike for you to adjust and extract some more potential. So it doesn't always mean new parts. You're looking for things that can start you down a road of improvement. So if this new exhaust changes the torque map, well, that might allow us now to give us more horsepower without losing grip. You see what I'm saying? So it's not just about, well, does the new exhaust work? Well, now the new exhaust now has to affect the power delivery and the torque. And does that affect how the bike comes out of the corner? Well, how the bike goes into the corner and comes out of the corner, does that affect the aero we have on it? Well, now that we're getting more horsepower to the ground because we've increased grip, we can actually increase the aero because we're not worried about killing our top speed. The Yamaha in particular, you can't just throw a big fat fucking wing on the thing because it's not fast enough down the straights. It'll be like pushing a dump truck uphill. So they have to figure out how to get more horsepower to the ground first. How do we get these grip issues, this corner speed fixed? And then once they do that, they can go, okay, well now let's look for that downforce on the front end. So it's not just about new parts, new parts, new parts. And I think the media just needs to fucking stop it. It's incredibly annoying that that's all they want to report. Oh, they're trying a new exhaust, they're trying to do this. When we're talking about test riders, we're talking about Dani Pedrosa and Lorenzo Salvadore and this new exciting lab bike, and the bike Yamaha is bringing on Monday, which is supposedly some new radical motorcycle, I get it. But on a Friday, during practice, it's not a testing session. They have to set the bike up for the weekend. They're not there just testing new parts, testing new parts, testing new parts. They have to figure out how to make the motorcycle fit that track. Then maybe they'll throw something on, see if it helps, see if there's no difference. Go back, analyze the data, which there are mountains of. It's not just about throwing on new shit. So I'm glad to hear Fabio Quartararo say, hey, I'm just not looking for a quantity of parts from all over the map. I'm looking for stuff that can really make a difference in the long term. Because again, it's a 2-year contract. Then the regulations change. After that, it's a long road they have in front of them. It's not about just, let's throw on the new parts and hopefully that's good. And if it's not, we'll just try something new tomorrow. So Media Center guys, ask a new freaking question. The best question asked at COTA, the one that got all the headlines, was when one of the media guys asked what all the riders thought about Kevin Schwantz. Hey, I'm doing an article on Kevin Schwantz. What do you all think of him? And we got so much good stuff from that question. So, new material, guys, new material. Us on social media are always asked, new material, what's new? Guys in the Media Center need to come up with some new frickin' questions that aren't, what parts are you bringing this week? And now I'll get off my soapbox for exactly 1 second. So finally, I want to talk about Rolland Sands, motorcycle builder, motorcycle racer, and general personality, Rolland Sands. Because he was asked about the Liberty Media takeover of MotoGP, and his main quote that was headlined all over the internet was, Americans aren't going to care about MotoGP until they're given a reason to. Okay. His second quote was that if MotoGP wants to do Drive to Survive for MotoGP like F1 did, if that's their plan, it has to be in English because Americans won't be interested if they have to read subtitles. So first I want to go through the stuff that I disagree with Rolland on. I don't really know him, so maybe I should call him Mr. Sands. The first thing I disagree with him about is this comment about subtitles, that Americans won't be interested in something if it's not in English, which is the single stupidest thing that I've ever heard. Am I being hyperbolic? Yes. But it is a stupid comment that Americans aren't interested in something if it's not speaking English at them. Now, am I saying this out of nowhere? No, I bring receipts. The most popular sporting figures in the world right now, and the best-selling jerseys, the highest-selling tickets, these people aren't American and they don't speak English. The most popular soccer star in the world and currently playing in the MLS in America is Lionel Messi. I can't even tell you the last time I heard Lionel Messi speak English, and he's the most popular soccer star in America by far. Those Miami games, I'm an LAFC fan. I'm here in LA. When Miami comes to LA to play, those tickets are too freaking expensive to go to the game. He draws the crowd in. The most popular baseball player, the number one selling jersey, or at least one of them, but the number one selling jersey for our hometown Dodgers, for sure, is a guy you may have heard of named Shohei Ohtani, who does not speak English. He has to speak through an interpreter, which has been made very, very famous in the last few weeks. Shohei Ohtani is the biggest thing to happen to baseball since Babe Ruth, and he does not speak a word of English, and we don't care at all. Go to a Dodger game and listen to the people chanting for Shohei Ohtani. It never stops. He hit a home run the other night, I think, where was it? The Reds Stadium that went 450 feet. Home runs don't speak English. They are universal. No one cares. Okay, but those are sports stars. We're talking about filmed entertainment like Drive to Survive. One of the most popular shows in America in the last 5 years was Squid Game. It was a phenomenon. Squid Game. Everyone watched it. You go on Halloween for the last 3 years, you can't walk 10 feet without seeing a Squid Game costume. Massive show. You had to read subtitles. I mean, there probably was a dubbed version, but who on earth can watch dubbed live action entertainment? I can't. So I don't agree that Americans will only tune in if there's no subtitles and if everything's in English. I think that's an old angry man going, "Grr, why do I gotta read subtitles? Why are there so many Europeans in MotoGP?" Because there is. That's where the sport is. It's centered in Europe, and that's where it lives. Mad Willie writes, anime as a whole. Yeah, I watch a lot of anime. And the dubbed versions, you can kind of watch. Some of them are better than others, but it's all subtitled, and it's massively popular here in the US. Now, here's the things I will agree with Rolland Sands about how to get Americans interested in MotoGP. Americans do have to have a reason to tune in to MotoGP. If you've never watched a race, you're not just going to be flipping channels and go, I feel like I'll watch this now. It's just not how it works. And Drive to Survive was the way that a lot of Americans transitioned into being Formula One fans. We call it a barrier to entry. And it's true with everything. When you sit down to watch a scripted show, when you turn on HBO, the barrier to entry these days is the thumbnail that shows up on HBO Max, or Max now. And they have to put, the stars' names and the directors' names and a pretty description and a trailer and a movie poster, and they have to entice you to click on that thumbnail. And that's the barrier to entry. And you watch the trailer, and if the trailer seems interesting to you, then you'll invest in sitting down and watching an hour-long pilot or a 2-hour-long movie. You don't just, I'll watch that out of nowhere, usually. Sometimes you can stumble upon things. We all flipped through channels when we were kids back in the 1900s. But for the most part, people have a barrier to entry with anything. So with MotoGP, and this is speaking from my own personal experience, I wasn't a person who grew up on motorsports. I knew who Kevin Schwantz was. I pulled out a magazine of his motorcycle and I'd slapped it on my wall because it was a cool looking bike and I liked motorcycles. My mom said, you can't have a motorcycle. So in retaliation, I put a picture of one on my wall at 12 years old. But I was never a fan of the sport. What got me really into MotoGP were the Mark Neal documentaries. Faster, Fastest, The Doctor, The Texas Tornado, and The Kentucky Kid, and Hitting the Apex. Hitting the Apex in particular was one that just got me freaking hooked on MotoGP. That was my barrier to entry, was seeing the stories come to life, seeing Valentino Rossi. Is he going to retire? Is he not going to retire? Marco Simoncelli, the passing of the baton between the two and the tragic ending of that story. And then the rise of Marc Marquez, the retirement of Casey Stoner. All of these things made the sport interesting and watchable to me that made me go, man, MotoGP, there's some storylines, there's some drama here. Let me go and find out more. I go to YouTube and find out a little more. I go to social media outlets and I find out a little bit more. And soon as you can say MotoGP is awesome, here I am talking to all of you about it. And it's all I talk about. And now I am the self-proclaimed North America's biggest fan of MotoGP. But I needed that barrier to entry. I wasn't just going to flip on a race. I needed that nudge to get involved in the sport. And I think that's what Americans need. They need a nudge. They need a reason. He is right. They need a reason to care about the characters of MotoGP. They need a reason to really want to be involved in it. So here's a couple of ways that I can maybe articulate to you where I think MotoGP can maybe lower this barrier to entry just a little bit. So let's just talk about the elephant in the room first, Drive to Survive. The first thing everyone said when they heard Liberty Media was buying MotoGP, they said, well, we're going to get a Drive to Survive now for MotoGP. MotoGP already tried to do that. It was very poorly done. To Rolland Sands' point, it was not in English, most of it. But I don't think that was really the problem. I think the filmmaking, the style of filmmaking felt very amateur. It felt very surface level, and it was about racing. It wasn't about the drama, and it wasn't about the characters. Where Drive to Survive succeeds is they make it about the characters. They don't necessarily make it about who won what race and why they won the race. The race isn't the drama part. If you want the drama of racing, you watch the race. If you want the drama of the teams and the owners and the drivers and all of the money and the power and the struggle behind the scenes, that's why you tune into Drive to Survive. Could they do that for MotoGP? Maybe. But the paddocks are very different. The MotoGP paddock is set up very different than the F1 paddock. It's just not the same story. We don't have those same exact kind of characters. Do we have villains and heroes? Sure. But I don't think just that's the sticker you throw and you go, hey, we're going to do Ride to Survive, and now MotoGP is a household name. Could they do it? I could see them trying, but I do think they should take a little bit different of a tactic, maybe with less full-length documentary series and more kind of like Mark did with All In, where it's just about this particular subject matter, or the development of Pedro Acosta, like really picking a subject to the documentary and following that. We see Jake Dixon on YouTube doing his own thing, talking about his road through motorcycle racing. And a lot of these guys have these awesome stories. But I think we need to be more focused in MotoGP than just here it is and watch it all, because it's never going to translate in the exact same way. The other thing that we have at our disposal that we've never really had before is social media. And MotoGP historically has not been very good at mobilizing social media. It's very, very dry. They show race clips, they show race crashes, they kind of show the same thing throughout 3 races. It's very homogenized, and it's not special. It doesn't make the user feel included in the experience. And this year is the first year I noticed, I think the Aprillia team is doing an amazing job in their social media by bringing Maverick, Salvadore, and Aleix to their fans. Like, if you haven't seen the Factory Aprilia TikTok page, they've got a lot of good stuff on there. And it's more than just the, like, what's your favorite food? Where do you like to go on vacation? Get to know the riders. Like, blah, blah, blah. Give me the stories. Give me the juice. Give me the blood, sweat, and tears these guys spill. Say what you want about Marc Marquez. Love him or hate him. All In, his documentary that's on Amazon, or at least it was on Amazon, is a pretty good portrayal of what he's gone through. Like, whether you like him or hate him, I don't care. But the documentary definitely makes him a human being. If that was the only thing that documentary was trying to do, is that make him from a robot who just kind of says, it's all about passion and winning the championship, into a human being who has a brother who they get along great, they live together, this grandfather that he loved and adored, the hurt and the pain of the surgeries and trying to fight his way back. It's a good story. That's what we should be telling. Instead, we have Fran Wild asking, so what's your favorite food to eat before a race? It's like, Jesus, really? We've got the best riders in the world, and that's what we're going to ask them. So I think we can mobilize social units. I have friends who've never watched a lap of F1. Not even one lap, but they know who Valtteri Bottas is, because his TikTok is unhinged and wonderful, and the Uber Share ads that he's done are amazing. Like, I am a Valtteri fan, and I don't even watch F1, but it's through social media that we impact the sport. And I think we can do it in a much more official way. Some of the riders, I think Aleix's vlogs were mentioned here in the chat. There's a lot of riders doing really good things. Jonathan Ray's vlogs, like, there are riders that are specifically doing things, but MotoGP as a whole can do a better job of bringing the sport to people who don't know it. And it's not about the racing. Forget it. Forget the racing for one moment. That's why people who are involved in MotoGP sometimes make the worst content, because they love racing. But you have to be a storyteller first and a fan of racing second if you want to hook the new fans. And I don't mean forget the old fans and throw the sport away. I'm saying introducing new fans into the sport that we all love. Now, the last thing I'm going to say about how does MotoGP lower the barrier to entry for the average viewer. Make the sport more accessible. I'm going to say that again because I don't know if everyone really understands what I mean when I say make the sport more accessible. There's a lot of things in MotoGP that are behind a paywall, and I get it's a company, they need to make money. And where media deals, I'm actually pretty thankful for the paywall in a lot of ways, because here in America, there was nowhere to watch MotoGP. There's no cable subscription I could get that would show it to me consistently. There's no bar I can go to watch. The only way I can watch it is going on the app. And having full long season access to every race, including every race from, was like when I first joined, from like 1996 all the way through present day, that is worth money. So I understand why those full races are behind the paywall. As for the clips, they're not behind the paywall really. They're on YouTube, they're on TikTok, they're everywhere. You just have to look a little harder. They're not going to be presented to you by MotoGP, but they're not supplied to you really by the NFL or MLB or anything else. Like SportsCenter is where you watch highlights. MLB just allows SportsCenter to have access to that stuff. Well, we don't have a SportsCenter for MotoGP here in America. They don't cover MotoGP on our mainstream sports. We don't have that show. I would like that show. I'm trying to get that show. Me personally, I'm trying to get that show made. I want Good Morning MotoGP to be the Good Morning America, the sports center of MotoGP for North American fans so we can get the stuff we want to get. So when I say accessibility, it's less about putting things behind a paywall, and it's more about making the sport accessible to the fans directly over the internet, but also in person. Now, it's funny, somebody in the chat here mentions Moto America, because the thing I'm going to say about Moto America is when you go to the Moto America race, it is the most accessible sport I've ever been to. The amount of access you have paying to go to a Moto America weekend where you can walk around the entire paddock, you can see them work on the motorcycles, you can talk to the team bosses, you can talk to the reps, you can talk to the mechanics, you can talk to the riders, you can walk right up to their tents and talk to them. You can walk through the pit lanes, and all of the riders, the biggest superstars to the smallest guys that you've never heard of, are all out there signing autographs side by side, reaching out to the kids, doing pre-shows, post-shows. They're so accessible to the fans. And I think MotoGP has to figure out how to do that to MotoGP here in America, is how to make it feel like these riders aren't superstars who you see behind the red curtain with their sunglasses on and they're just too cool because they're world superstars. Because they are. But at the same time, do you want to grow the sport to people? You have to introduce yourself to people. And I don't think MotoGP has done a good job of introducing itself to people. They want to be behind the paywall. They want to be behind the velvet curtain, just like Formula One. But you have to grow to that, at least here in the American market. And I would like to see them doing a little more community outreach when they come to Austin. They do a lot of very private events. I think there was something this last week, there was an article about how Marc Marquez and Alex Marquez were having another private event with some sort of soccer star. And it's all behind closed doors, and it's all for millionaires. Like, millionaires can go watch Marc Marquez hang out with soccer stars. They need to be doing that stuff for the rest of us. Now, I wasn't a big fan of the podium celebration after the sprint because it took so long to get them from the sprint to the stage and get that whole thing going. But I like the thought behind it of bringing the riders to the fans, going to that amphitheater and letting 1,000 fans be right there for the podium, and rather than having it be at the end of the straight where no one can see it and it's just the teams that are celebrating with themselves. So it's a long-winded way of saying MotoGP can go a long way of reaching out to the fans. That doesn't cost a lot of money. It's not a lot of marketing. It's not a lot of changing the way they do things internationally. It's just about introducing themselves to the American fans. Find these opportunities to find their characters and do some very pointed documentaries about these characters. These documentary exposés. We watch things like 2020. Do 10 minutes on Dani Pedrosa's career and him coming back as a wild card. Do 10 minutes on Pedro Acosta coming out of the gates this year like he's on fire. And get that on news programs. Get that in magazines. Get that on streaming platforms. Get it out to people. Show them that there's characters behind the helmet. And I think once people appreciate those characters, then they'll get involved in MotoGP and they'll be here to stay. Because I, for sure as hell, was. So thank you for joining me. Again, this was a TikTok live broadcast of the Horsepower... Well, let me start that over. Thank you once again for joining me. This was a TikTok live broadcast of the Horsepower Rodeo podcast that will then be reposted in its entirety on YouTube.